Tyler Bennett was 3 hours into fixing the busted coolant system when he heard it. A sound that didn't belong in the cold metal guts of a broken freighter. Chirping. He froze, wrench still gripped in his oil-stained hands, and cocked his head to listen. The sound came again from somewhere deep inside the exhaust vent. High-pitched and desperate, like something small and scared was crying out for help. Probably some space rat, Tyler muttered to himself, but his gut told him otherwise. Space rats didn't sound like that. Nothing he'd ever heard sounded quite like that. Orbital Station Theta 7 wasn't the fanciest place in the galaxy. It was a neutral trading post stuck out on the edge of civilized space, where ships from 100 different worlds stopped to refuel, restock, and occasionally get their engines fixed by guys like Tyler. He'd been working here for almost 5 years now, running his small repair shop out of Bay 12. The pay was decent enough, nobody asked too many questions about his past, and he got to work with his hands. That was all Tyler really needed. But right now, something in that exhaust vent needed him more. He set down his wrench and grabbed the heavy-duty flashlight from his tool belt. The beam cut through the darkness of the vent shaft, and that's when he saw them. 3 pairs of eyes, glowing like molten amber in the dark, staring right back at him. What the hell? Tyler's heart skipped. The creatures huddled together were no bigger than house cats, maybe smaller. Their bodies were covered in scales that shimmered and shifted colors in his flashlight beam, like oil floating on water. Midnight black 1 second, deep purple the next, then flashing hints of dark blue. They had tiny folded wings pressed tight against their trembling bodies, and small bumps on their heads where horns were just starting to grow. But what got Tyler's attention most was how badly they were shaking. These weren't just scared animals. They were freezing cold, their little bodies vibrating so hard he could see it from 6 feet away. Ah hell, Tyler breathed out. He didn't know what species they were. Could have been some exotic pets that escaped from a cargo hold. Could have been wild creatures that snuck aboard looking for warmth. Honestly, Tyler didn't care about any of that right now. All he saw were 3 terrified babies who were going to die if someone didn't help them. And there wasn't anyone else around. Tyler carefully reached into the vent shaft, moving slow so he wouldn't scare them more. His fingers were rough from years of mechanic work, calloused and scarred, but he made them gentle. Come here, little guys. I got you. I got you. The creatures didn't fight him. They were too cold and weak for that. Tyler scooped all 3 of them up and cradled them against his chest, inside his open work jacket. Their scales were like ice against his shirt. One of them made a pitiful little chirping sound that broke his heart. Yeah, I know. You're okay now. Let's get you warmed up. Tyler carried them carefully back to his workshop, moving quick but steady. His workspace was cluttered with tools, spare parts, and half-finished repair jobs, but it was home. He cleared off his workbench with one hand and started grabbing supplies. Thermal blankets that he usually used for sensitive equipment. A couple of heat lamps that he kept for soldering delicate circuits. Some soft rags that were actually clean for once. Within 5 minutes, Tyler had built a makeshift nest on his workbench. He layered the thermal blankets to create a soft base, positioned the heat lamps at just the right distance to warm without burning, and gently placed the 3 creatures into their new bed. Almost immediately, they huddled together in the center of the warmth. Their violent shaking began to ease. The desperate chirping quieted down to soft, sleepy coos. One of them, the smallest of the 3, looked up at Tyler with those glowing amber eyes and made a sound that was almost like a purr. Tyler felt something tight in his chest loosen. He smiled despite the weirdness of the whole situation. There you go, little guys. That's better, right? He stood there for a moment just watching them settle in. Their scales had stopped shifting colors and were now a steady, deep black with hints of dark red, like cooling embers. Their breathing was evening out. They were going to be okay. That's when every alarm on the station started blaring at once. The sound was deafening, echoing through the metal corridors. Red emergency lights began flashing. Tyler's workshop computer automatically switched to the station-wide emergency broadcast. Attention all personnel. This is not a drill. Imperial Draconian warship approaching. Emperor Vorith the Destroyer is requesting immediate docking clearance. All personnel are to remain in their current locations. Station-wide lockdown is now in effect. Repeat, this is not a drill. Tyler's blood ran cold. The wrench he'd been holding clattered to the floor. Everyone in the galaxy knew that name. Emperor Vorith the Destroyer. The leader of the Draconian Empire. A being who had personally led fleets that burned entire rebellious planets down to ash. A ruler so merciless that his enemies surrendered at the mere mention of his arrival. Vorith didn't visit random trading stations. Not unless something was seriously wrong. Behind Tyler, the three baby creatures chirped softly in their warm nest. They were already falling asleep, finally safe and comfortable for probably the first time in hours. Tyler looked at them, then at his computer screen showing the massive warship approaching the station. His stomach dropped as pieces started clicking together in his head. Those scales. Those wings. Those developing horns. "Oh no," Tyler whispered. "Oh no no no." He had a very very bad feeling about this. Tyler barely had 20 minutes before his entire world turned upside down. He just managed to find some protein paste in his emergency rations when the first explosion hit his door. The metal frame buckled inward with a screech that made his teeth hurt. Tyler spun around, his heart jumping into his throat, and watched his workshop door get torn off its hinges like it was made of paper. 6 draconian warriors came through the opening like a storm of scales and fury. They moved fast for creatures their size, fanning out across his small workshop with military precision. Each one stood at least 7 feet tall, their bodies covered in deep crimson scales that caught the harsh overhead lights and seemed to glow. They wore black armor that looked like it could stop a tank round, and every single one of them had a weapon raised and pointed into the room. At Tyler. Whoa whoa. Tyler's hands shot up instinctively, even though part of his brain was screaming that raised hands wouldn't do much good against whatever those weapons were. Energy rifles maybe? Plasma cannons? He didn't know draconian military hardware, and right now didn't seem like a great time to learn. But then his mechanic instincts kicked in, the part of him that was always aware of his surroundings, always thinking 3 steps ahead. The warriors weren't shooting. They were searching. Their reptilian eyes swept across every corner of his cluttered workshop, scanning past his tool racks and equipment, looking for something specific. The nest. Tyler's stomach dropped. He slowly lowered his hands and carefully moved his body, putting himself between the armed soldiers and the workbench where 3 tiny creatures were sleeping under heat lamps. It wasn't much of a shield. Hell, it was basically useless. But it was all he had. "Easy," Tyler said, forcing his voice to stay calm even though his pulse was hammering in his ears. "You're scaring them." One of the warriors hissed something in a language Tyler didn't understand. It sounded like rocks grinding together mixed with a snake's warning. Another warrior took a step forward, his weapon still raised, and that's when the babies woke up. The hatchlings' chirping shattered the tense silence. But this wasn't the soft, content cooing from before. This was pure panic. High-pitched and desperate, the sound of children who'd just been jolted awake by violence and noise and the presence of armed strangers. Tyler's heart broke at that sound. He didn't turn around, didn't take his eyes off the warriors, but he heard the scrambling of tiny claws on his metal workbench. Heard the frantic chirping getting closer. Then he felt them. 3 small bodies hit his legs and started climbing. Their claws dug through his work pants and jacket, not enough to hurt but enough to grip as they scaled up his body like he was a tree. Within seconds all 3 hatchlings had buried themselves against him. 2 pressed into his neck on either side, their trembling bodies warm against his skin. The smallest one somehow wriggled inside his jacket collar, tucking itself against his shoulder. They were terrified. The draconian warriors froze. Their weapons lowered slightly. Their eyes went wide and Tyler could see confusion ripple across their scaled faces. One of them said something sharp and quick, and another responded in the same harsh language. They sounded shocked. Tyler kept one hand against his chest, holding the smallest hatchling steady through his jacket. The other 2 pressed so tight against his neck that he could feel their rapid heartbeats. "It's okay," he whispered to them, ignoring the soldiers entirely for a moment. "It's okay, little guys. I got you." That's when the temperature in the room seemed to drop. A shadow fell across the destroyed doorway so large it blocked out the corridor lights behind it. Every single draconian warrior reacted instantly, snapping to attention and dropping to one knee. Their weapons clattered to the floor. Their heads bowed. Tyler's mouth went dry. Emperor Vorith entered the workshop, and Tyler understood immediately why entire planets surrendered at this being's approach. The Emperor wasn't just big. He was massive, easily 8.5 feet tall, with shoulders so broad he had to turn slightly to fit through the doorway. His scales were like polished obsidian, so dark they seemed to absorb the light, with veins of deep red running through them like lava under stone. 2 enormous horns curved back from his skull, each one etched with symbols that probably meant something terrifying. But it was the eyes that really got Tyler. Golden eyes that burned with an intelligence and fury that was older than most civilizations. Eyes that had watched worlds burn. Eyes that had never known mercy. Those eyes locked onto Tyler and he forgot how to breathe. "You." Vorith's voice wasn't loud, but it filled the entire workshop anyway. It rumbled like distant thunder, like the ground splitting open before an earthquake. You have my children. Tyler's throat felt like sandpaper. The hatchlings clung tighter to him, making nervous little chirping sounds. He could feel them shaking again, but not from cold this time. They recognized this voice. Maybe they recognized the presence, the power, something instinctual. Every survival instinct Tyler had was screaming at him to run. To drop to his knees like the warriors. To beg for mercy. To say whatever would get him out of this alive. Instead, he swallowed hard and met those golden eyes. They were freezing, Tyler said. His voice came out steadier than he felt. They needed help. Emperor Vorith took one step forward. Just one. But it felt like the whole room shifted with that movement. The air pressure changed. The workshop seemed smaller, the walls closer. Tyler's instincts went haywire, screaming danger, predator, run, but he forced himself to stay still. The hatchlings needed him calm. If he panicked, they'd panic worse. The Emperor took another step. Tyler could see the muscles moving under those obsidian scales. Could see the barely contained power in every movement. This was a being who could probably tear him apart with one hand. Tyler's legs wanted to run. His hands wanted to shake. But he stood his ground. The smallest hatchling, the one tucked inside his collar, peeked its tiny head out. Those amber eyes blinked up at Emperor Vorith. The little creature made a soft chirping sound, almost curious, then nuzzled back against Tyler's neck and settled in like he was the safest place in the universe. Emperor Vorith stopped moving. He stared at Tyler, at his children clinging to this human like he was their parent. His expression was unreadable, but Tyler saw something flicker in those golden eyes. Confusion. Disbelief. Something that might have been shock. The Imperial heirs, the future of the Draconian Empire, had bonded to a human mechanic from Earth. Tyler knew enough about biology to understand what Vorith was thinking. This was impossible. The silence stretched out, heavy and suffocating, and Tyler waited to see if he'd survive the next 5 minutes. The medical bay aboard Emperor Vorith's warship was the most advanced facility Tyler had ever seen in his life. Sleek black walls embedded with technology he couldn't even begin to understand. Scanning equipment that hummed with energy. Medical instruments that looked more like torture devices than healing tools. Everything was built on a scale meant for beings twice his size. And right now, at least a dozen draconian scientists were staring at him like he was the strangest thing they'd ever encountered. This defies all biological precedent, the chief physician said for what had to be the 5th time. Her silver scales caught the overhead lights as she paced back and forth, her long tail swishing with obvious frustration. Hatchlings bond only with blood parents. Only with blood parents. It is written in our genetics, coded into our very DNA. This is impossible. Tyler sat on an examination platform that was too high for him, his legs dangling like a kid in a grown-up's chair. All 3 hatchlings were piled in his lap, fast asleep and snoring softly. The smallest one was drooling a little bit on his work shirt, leaving a small damp spot. Tyler didn't mind. Emperor Vorith stood against the far wall, his massive arms crossed over his chest. He hadn't said a word since they'd brought Tyler here an hour ago. Those golden eyes just watched everything, missing nothing. Run the genetic scan again, one of the scientists said, his dark green scales marked with age spots. There must be a compatibility marker we're missing. We've run it 4 times, another physician snapped back. The human shares 0 genetic material with our species. 0. There is no biological reason for this bond. Tyler shifted carefully, trying not to wake the babies. His back was getting sore from sitting still so long, but every time he tried to move, the hatchlings would stir and make distressed sounds. So he stayed put. Explain your methods, human? Emperor Vorith's voice cut through the scientific debate like a blade. The room went silent immediately. Tyler looked up at the Emperor and tried to think of how to explain something that felt so obvious to him. There's no method, he said finally. They were cold, so I warmed them up. They were hungry, so I fed them. They were scared, so I talked to them until they calmed down. That's it. That's all I did. The chief physician turned to stare at him. That's it? That's your entire process. Yeah. Tyler gently adjusted his arms so the middle hatchling's head wasn't at such an awkward angle. What else would I do? They're babies. Baby anything needs the same basic things, right? Food, warmth, safety. Doesn't matter if it's a human baby or a puppy or, well, dragon babies. Dragon babies, the physician repeated flatly like Tyler had just said something offensive. An Imperial advisor stepped forward from the group, his crimson scales polished to a shine. His voice was cold and suspicious. My Emperor, the human must possess some form of telepathic control we are not detecting. Perhaps a pheromone-based weapon. A chemical agent designed to influence draconian brain chemistry. This bonding is not natural. It cannot be natural. Tyler laughed before he could stop himself. The sound echoed in the quiet medical bay, and he immediately regretted it when every draconian in the room tensed. Even the Emperor's eyes narrowed dangerously. Sorry, Tyler said quickly, raising one hand while keeping the other on the sleeping hatchlings. But no. It's not a weapon. I'm not controlling them. Look, they're kids. Scared kids who needed someone to make them feel safe. That's all this is. It doesn't matter what species you are. The principle is the same. We do not coddle our young, Emperor Vorith said, and his voice had gone cold as ice. Draconians are forged in fire. We learn strength through suffering. Through hardship. Through challenge. This is how we have built an empire that spans 100 worlds. This is our way. Tyler met those burning golden eyes, and maybe it was stupid, maybe he should have kept his mouth shut, but the words came out anyway. And how's that working out for you? They ran away from your ship, didn't they? The temperature in the medical bay dropped so fast Tyler could see his breath. Ice practically formed in the air. Every scientist took a step back. The advisor who'd suggested mind control looked like he wanted to disappear into the floor. Emperor Vorith pushed off from the wall and took 3 heavy steps forward. Each footfall rang like a hammer on an anvil. Tyler's heart hammered in his chest, but he didn't look away. The hatchling stirred in his lap, making sleepy noises. Careful, human, Vorith said, his voice barely above a whisper. Somehow that was more terrifying than if he'd shouted. You speak of things you do not understand. Maybe, Tyler admitted. His mouth was dry, but he kept going. Look, I'm not saying you're wrong about your culture. I'm not saying draconians should change everything about how they live. But these 3. He looked down at the sleeping babies. They're barely hatched. They don't need to be warriors yet. They just need to be kids first. Let them be kids, then teach them to be strong later. Your species would have been conquered long ago with such weakness, Vorith said. Tyler took a breath. This was it. Either he'd get through to this terrifying emperor, or he'd probably die. We survived ice ages that froze half our planet. Predators that hunted us when we were weak and had no claws or armor. Diseases that killed millions. We almost nuked ourselves into extinction at least twice. Know how we made it through all of that? Vorith waited silent. We learned to take care of each other, Tyler said quietly. We figured out that helping each other, protecting each other, caring about each other, that wasn't weakness. That was the thing that kept us alive when we had nothing else. When we were facing extinction, it wasn't the strongest humans who survived. It was the ones who worked together. Tyler gently stroked the smallest hatchling's head, feeling the tiny bumps where horns were growing. Caring isn't weakness. It's just a different kind of strength. The medical bay was so quiet Tyler could hear the medical equipment humming. Could hear his own heartbeat. Could hear the soft breathing of 3 sleeping babies who trusted him completely. Emperor Vorith stared at him for what felt like forever. Those ancient golden eyes searched Tyler's face, looking for something. A lie maybe. A trick. Some hidden agenda. Finally Vorith spoke. You will come to the homeworld. Tyler blinked. What? My children will not eat for anyone else. They refuse food from their own kind. They cry for you. The Emperor's jaw tightened. You will accompany us to the draconian homeworld. You will continue to care for them. And you will teach me this, caring. Tyler looked down at the 3 babies sleeping so peacefully in his lap. Thought about his small workshop back on the station. His quiet, simple life. Then he thought about what would happen to these little ones if he said no. Yeah, Tyler sighed. Okay. But if I'm doing this, we do it my way when it comes to them. I'm not going to let anyone hurt them or scare them just to make them strong. Deal? The destroyer of worlds, the emperor who had burned planets and crushed rebellions without mercy, hesitated. Tyler could see the internal struggle on his face. Then, slowly Emperor Vorith nodded. Deal. 3 weeks living in the imperial palace of the draconian homeworld, and Tyler had made exactly one friend. Princess Lyra was Emperor Vorith's younger sister, and unlike most of the royal court, she didn't look at Tyler like he was some kind of contamination. Her silver scales reminded him of moonlight, and she had a way of moving that was both graceful and dangerous at the same time. She was also the only draconian who seemed genuinely curious about humans rather than disgusted by them. Right now, she was walking beside Tyler through one of the palace's many corridors while the 3 hatchlings played a few feet ahead. They were getting bigger already, almost the size of medium dogs now, and they loved to chase each other around the polished stone floors. The court is not happy, Lyra said quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. She kept her eyes forward, but Tyler could hear the warning in her tone. A human raising the imperial heirs? Many of the nobles call it an abomination. High General Torvik has been especially vocal. Tyler sighed, watching the hatchlings tumble over each other. Yeah, I've noticed the death glares. Pretty hard to miss when someone looks at you like you're something they scraped off their boot. Just that morning he'd walked past a group of court officials who'd stopped their conversation to stare at him with open hostility. One had even hissed something that Tyler was pretty sure wasn't a compliment. The palace servants were polite enough, but most of them wouldn't meet his eyes. Tyler was used to being an outsider, but this was different. This felt dangerous. You need to be careful, Lyra continued. There are those who believe your influence weakens the heirs. That you are teaching them to be soft. To be. The smallest hatchling, Tyler had started calling her Ember because of the way her scales glowed red when she was happy, suddenly chirped in alarm. It wasn't her normal playful sound. This was sharp, urgent, afraid. The other two hatchlings, Ash and Cinder, immediately scattered behind Tyler's legs, pressing against him and making frightened noises. Every instinct Tyler had developed over 36 years of life suddenly screamed danger. He didn't question it. Didn't hesitate. He just reacted. Down. Tyler shouted, grabbing Princess Lyra's arm and pulling her low. The window exploded inward in a shower of crystalline glass. 3 figures in matte black armor dropped through the opening with deadly precision, landing in crouches with their weapons already raised and aimed. The armor was designed to absorb light, making them look like shadows given physical form. But their weapons glowed with that unmistakable charging hum of energy rifles. Aimed directly at the hatchlings. Tyler's world went into sharp focus. Time seemed to slow down the way it did when he was troubleshooting a complex mechanical problem. His brain cataloged everything in a fraction of a second. 3 assassins. Military-grade armor. Professional movements. Energy weapons fully charged. Palace guards at least 50 feet away down the corridor. Too far. Way too far. The assassin's fingers moved toward the triggers. Tyler moved faster than he'd ever moved in his life. He lunged forward, scooped all 3 hatchlings against his chest, and threw himself sideways just as the first energy bolt scorched through the air where they'd been standing. The heat from it was so intense Tyler felt the hair on his arms singe. He hit the ground hard, rolling to absorb the impact while protecting the babies clutched against him. The hatchlings were screaming now, high-pitched cries of pure terror that made Tyler's heart want to break. But he couldn't stop. Couldn't comfort them. Not yet. Another energy bolt slammed into the stone floor inches from his head, sending chips of rock flying. Tyler scrambled behind a massive stone pillar, pressing his back against it while the hatchlings buried themselves against his chest and neck. His heart was hammering so hard he could feel it in his teeth. The babies were shaking violently, their claws digging into his jacket. It's okay, Tyler gasped, even though nothing was okay. The assassins were advancing. He could hear their boots on the stone floor, methodical and unhurried. Professional killers who knew they had their targets trapped. The palace guards were shouting now, running toward them, but they wouldn't make it in time. Tyler could do the math. 10 seconds, maybe 15 before the assassins rounded this pillar. 5 seconds after that they'd all be dead. Tyler's mechanic brain kicked into overdrive, the same way it did when he was faced with an impossible repair job. What did he have? What could he use? His eyes darted around frantically. A maintenance panel on the wall, partially hidden behind decorative scrollwork. Draconians loved their flame motifs, which meant fuel lines running through the palace for all the decorative torches. A bundle of those ornate torches mounted on the wall nearby, real flames flickering because the Draconians thought electric lights were for lesser species. An idea formed. Crazy. Dangerous. Absolutely stupid. But it was all he had. Tyler laid the hatchlings down behind the pillar. Stay here, he whispered urgently. Don't move no matter what you hear. Understand? Ember's eyes were wide with fear, but she chirped once. Yes. Tyler moved. He ripped the maintenance panel open with his bare hands, ignoring the pain as the metal edges cut his palms. Inside was exactly what he'd hoped for, a thick fuel line pumping combustible gas to feed the palace's decorative flame system. Tyler grabbed the line and yanked with everything he had. The line tore free and gas began spraying into the corridor with a hissing sound. The assassins were rounding the pillar now, weapons raised. Tyler grabbed one of the mounted torches, real flames dancing on its end. He made eye contact with the lead assassin, saw the surprise in the man's eyes behind his helmet visor. Hey, Tyler said. Catch. He threw the torch into the gas cloud. The corridor exploded into a wall of fire. The flames roared up to the ceiling, fed by the concentrated gas, creating an inferno that sent the assassins stumbling backward. Their armor could probably handle energy weapons and physical attacks, but nobody expected a human to just set the hallway on fire. "Run!" Tyler screamed, grabbing all 3 hatchlings and sprinting in the opposite direction. Alarms were blaring now. The flames were spreading. Tyler's lungs burned from the smoke, but he didn't stop. Just kept running, the babies clutched tight against his chest. He rounded a corner at full speed and slammed directly into something that felt like hitting a brick wall. Tyler bounced backward, nearly dropping the hatchlings, and looked up to see Emperor Vorith standing there with 24 royal guards fanning out behind him. The Emperor's golden eyes were blazing with fury that made his previous anger look like mild annoyance. "Assassins," Tyler panted, trying to catch his breath. His hands were bleeding. His clothes were singed. The hatchlings were crying against his chest. Someone just tried to kill your kids." Vorith's eyes swept over Tyler, taking in the injuries, the terrified children, the smoke billowing from the corridor behind them. His massive hands clenched into fists, and Tyler actually heard the scales on his knuckles crack with the pressure. But then something changed in the Emperor's expression. The fury was still there, burning hot enough to melt steel, but there was something else too. He looked at Tyler, this soft, weak human who just used nothing but quick thinking and a stupid plan to save his children from trained assassins. "You protected them," Vorith said, and his voice was strange, softer somehow. Tyler looked down at the 3 crying hatchlings in his arms, then back up at the Emperor. "Of course I did. That's what you do for kids. Any kids. Doesn't matter what they are or whose they are. You protect them." The royal guard swept past them, heading toward the fire and the assassins. Princess Lyra appeared, directing servants with fire suppression equipment. The palace became organized chaos. But Emperor Vorith just stood there, staring at Tyler. Hours later, after the fire was out, after the assassins were captured, after palace physicians had bandaged Tyler's hands and checked the hatchlings for injuries, Tyler finally got them settled into their nest in his quarters. They were exhausted, emotionally drained, but safe. All 3 curled together in a pile of warmth and soft blankets, finally asleep. Tyler was sitting on the floor beside their nest, his back against the wall, too tired to even make it to his own bed. His hands throbbed under the bandages. That's when Emperor Vorith entered without knocking. The Emperor stood in the doorway for a long moment, just looking at his sleeping children. Then at Tyler. Then back to his children. "You saved them with cleverness," Vorith said quietly. "Not strength. Not fire. Not weapons. You saw a problem, found a solution, and acted. In 3 seconds you did what my guards could not." Tyler shrugged, wincing as the movement pulled at his bandaged palms. "I'm a mechanic. That's what we do. We improvise. We use what we have." Vorith moved to stand beside the nest, gazing down at the 3 sleeping hatchlings. "The court says you have made them weak. That your human softness has infected the imperial line." He paused. "But today I saw my children fight to protect a servant who was caught in the crossfire. I saw them show mercy to one of the assassins who was injured. They are learning to be fierce and kind. Strong and gentle. This is not draconian. This is not human." The Emperor's golden eyes fixed on Tyler. "This is something new," Vorith said. "Something I do not understand but cannot deny. They take the best of what we teach them, both of us, and become more than either of us alone." Tyler managed a tired smile. "Yeah, that's what kids do. They're not supposed to be copies of us. They're supposed to be better than us." Emperor Vorith, the destroyer of worlds, the being who had crushed rebellions and burned planets, slowly bowed his head to a human mechanic. It was a gesture that would be recorded in draconian history books for generations. "Teach me," Vorith said simply. "Teach me how to be what they need." 6 months had passed since the assassination attempt, and Tyler's life had changed in ways he never could have imagined. He stood in what used to be an empty storage room but was now a fully equipped workshop that would have made any mechanic on Earth jealous. The draconian engineers had built it to his exact specifications, with tools from both human and draconian technology. Right now, Tyler was watching Ember carefully guide a soldering iron across a circuit board, her tongue sticking out slightly in concentration the way kids did when they were really focused on something. "Like this?" Ember asked. Her voice was still young, but deeper than it had been when Tyler first found her. She was nearly as tall as his waist now, her scales a beautiful deep red when she was happy like this. "Perfect," Tyler said, nodding with approval. "See? Steady claws make all the difference. You're getting really good at this." Ember's scales brightened to an even brighter red, and she made a pleased rumbling sound. Across the workshop, Ash and Cinder were working on their own projects. Ash was building a small hover platform, while Cinder was deep into programming a communication relay. All three had taken to engineering like they were born for it. The workshop door opened and Princess Lyra stepped inside. She'd become a regular visitor, often bringing young Draconians who wanted to learn what she called the human way of building things. Today, though, her expression was more formal than usual. "Tyler," she said, "the Emperor requests your presence in the throne room. You have visitors. From Earth." Tyler's heart skipped. He'd been so focused on life here that he hadn't thought much about home in months. Letters went back and forth, sure, but actual visitors? That was different. "Come on, kids," Tyler said, wiping his hands on a rag. "Let's go see what this is about." The three hatchlings immediately abandoned their projects and fell in step beside him, the way they always did. They were his shadow, his constant companions. Tyler couldn't imagine his life without them anymore. The throne room was packed with people when Tyler arrived. Ambassadors from at least a dozen different species stood in their designated areas, all watching with obvious interest. But Tyler's attention went straight to the two humans standing near Emperor Voritha's throne. Admiral Rebecca Hayes was a no-nonsense woman in her 50s, wearing a crisp Earth Fleet uniform with enough medals to prove she'd earned her position. Beside her stood Ambassador Robert Miller, a diplomatic type in a formal suit who somehow managed to look both impressed and overwhelmed by his surroundings. "Tyler." Rebecca broke protocol by grinning at him like they were old friends, even though they'd never met. "Do you have any idea what you've done? You've caused the biggest diplomatic incident in a century, and somehow made it a good thing." Tyler blinked, confused. What?" "The Draconian Empire has requested a formal alliance with Earth," Robert explained, and Tyler could hear the amazement in his voice. "A mutual cooperation treaty. Full diplomatic relations. Technology exchanges. This is completely unprecedented. The Draconians haven't allied with anyone in 300 years. Emperor Vorith stood from his throne, and the room fell silent immediately. He'd changed over these 6 months too. Still terrifying, still powerful, but there was something different in how he carried himself. Something softer around the edges. "This human," Voritha's voice filled the throne room, "showed me that true strength is more than fire and conquest. My children have grown mighty under our combined guidance. They can fight with the ferocity of Draconians, but they also build, create, and show mercy. They understand justice but also compassion. These are human qualities that we dismissed as weakness for generations." The Emperor's golden eyes swept across the assembled ambassadors. "We were wrong. Strength comes in many forms, and the strongest empires are not built on fear alone. Earth is establishing a full embassy here on the Draconian homeworld," Rebecca added, looking directly at Tyler. "And both our governments would like you to consider staying on as the official liaison. At least until the Imperial heirs reach maturity." Before Tyler could respond, he felt a tug on his sleeve. Ember was looking up at him with those amber eyes that still melted his heart every time. "You're not leaving, are you?" she asked quietly, but in the silent throne room, everyone heard it. Tyler looked down at the three young dragons who'd become his kids in every way that mattered. He thought about the workshop they'd built together. The dozens of young Draconians he'd started teaching, showing them that building things was just as honorable as destroying them. The way Vorith now asked his opinion on matters of state, actually listening to what a human mechanic thought about complex political situations. He thought about his old life back on Earth. The quiet, lonely apartment. The small repair shop where he'd worked alone most days. It had been peaceful, sure. Safe. Simple. But this was something that mattered. This was building bridges between species that had never understood each other before. This was proving that humanity's greatest strength wasn't in weapons or warships, but in the simple act of caring. "No," Tyler said, and he ruffled Ember's head plates the way she loved. "I'm not going anywhere. This is home now." Vorith stepped down from his throne and placed one massive clawed hand on Tyler's shoulder. It was a gesture that still shocked the traditionalist Draconians in court, but happened regularly now. "In our culture we have an ancient saying," Vorith announced to the room. "Fire purifies and strength protects." He paused, letting that sink in. "Today we add new words to that saying taught to us by humans. Compassion binds and together we rise." The throne room erupted in a mixture of reactions. Some ambassadors applauded. Others looked shocked. The Draconian nobles had mixed expressions, though Tyler noticed more acceptance now than there had been 6 months ago. That night, back in his quarters, Tyler was tucking the three hatchlings into their nests like he did every evening. They were getting too big for this ritual, really, but none of them wanted to give it up yet. Tyler didn't either, if he was honest. Tyler? Ember asked sleepily as he pulled the thermal blanket up around her. Can I ask you something? Sure, kiddo. What's up? That first day when you found us in the cold vent, Ember's eyes were already half closed. Why did you help us? You didn't know who we were. Didn't know if we were dangerous. Why'd you do it? Tyler smiled and sat on the edge of her nest. Was a good question. An important one. Because that's what humans do, he said softly. We see someone who needs help and we help them. We don't stop to think about whether they're the same species or if they'll repay us or what we'll get out of it. We just see someone cold and scared and alone, and we can't help but try to make it better. He looked at all three of them, these amazing kids who were going to grow up to lead an empire someday. We're pack animals, kiddo. We take care of our own. And sometimes, if you're open to it, our own can be bigger than just your species. Sometimes family is something you choose, not something you're born into. I'm glad you chose us, Ember mumbled, already drifting off to sleep. Me too, kid, Tyler whispered. Me too. He walked to the window and looked out over the palace grounds. In the courtyard below, he could see young Draconians working on mechanical projects side by side with human engineers. Guards from both species were training together, learning each other's techniques. In the gardens, Draconian and human children were playing some game that seemed to be a mixture of both cultures. It wasn't perfect. There were still tensions, still misunderstandings. Some Draconians still didn't trust humans, and plenty of humans were terrified of Draconians. But every day it got a little bit better. Every day the bridges grew a little stronger. Tyler Bennett, a mechanic from Chicago who just wanted a quiet life fixing engines, had somehow become the bridge between two species. And looking at those kids playing together, scales and skin side by side, he couldn't think of anything more important he could be doing. Humanity's greatest strength had never been in building better weapons or faster ships. It was in their unshakable belief that anyone, anything, could be family if you just cared enough to try. And sometimes that was enough to change the galaxy.